Welcome to SheVentures. I'm Doria, co-founder of CentSai. Listen to women who take risks, build community, and get shit done. Recording from Madison Avenue in New York City. Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/SheVentures and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title free and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audibletrial.com/SheVentures to get started today. Today, we are speaking to a woman whose latest business venture is popping, literally. The founder of True Pop Popcorn has made some fascinating pivots in her life. She is a former civil engineer, a veteran of the U.S. Air Force Air National Guard, a certified fitness trainer, a bodybuilder competitor, and also, while she was doing all of this, at some point had time to earn her doctorate in naturopathy. It's no surprise that she is also an inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to have her on SheVentures to tell us about her journey and the art of the pivot. Dr. Renette Dallas, welcome to SheVentures.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited about being a guest on your show.
So your bio speaks of a woman who has never shied away from a challenge. What kind of child were you? Did you have a dream from the beginning?
Of course, when I was a child, I probably thought that I was your ordinary child, but in retrospect, I was actually quite different. And I remember often my mother looking at my father saying, "That's your daughter," or my dad looking at my mom saying, "That's your child." I come from a large family. I have large, relatively speaking, today's family sizes. I have two brothers and two sisters. I'm the youngest daughter, and I have a younger brother. So with a family of five, you don't typically need neighbors. You kind of have enough people to do whatever you want to do in terms of playing games and establishing teams. And my brothers and sisters would always be out doing things. And I just, as a young child, a lot of games didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I'm telling my age now, but we used to play something that was popular back then when I was a child was hide and seek, where you literally would grab some other kids from the neighborhood. It'd probably be about a dozen. And you'd go and hide and wait for someone to find you. And I was like, that is so weird. What if nobody finds you? I'm just sitting under a rock or under a bridge for an hour or something, waiting for somebody to find me. And so I never wanted to do that. And then there were a couple of other things, I just thought that that's a little weird and I'd rather be doing something else. And what I was doing was I'd ask my mom or dad if I could use something that was around the backyard. And my father was a very well-rounded person. So he made our patio furniture, the benches and things like that. So we had a lot of wood at all times. He was amateur carpenter. And so I would take wood and rocks and then I'd take some paint and I'd paint them and just doing things like that. I would take clay and stick it on a glass bottle and build what I considered to be a statue, just didn't know the name back then, take hangers and put things together. So I was a very creative child. I think sometimes I would tease my parents when I was in college and say, you guys didn't know what to do with my talent. I was kind of like unbridled there and you should have sent me to some type of art school. But it was definitely different.
Who would you say influenced you the most in your childhood?
Would be my grandmother or my grandparents as a unit. We spent our summers in Alabama, Thomasville, Alabama, where my grandparents owned a significant amount of farmland. And so right after school let out, we would be sent down, the five of us as children, to help with my grandparents on the farm. And so they had all kinds of livestock and they grew everything from lima beans to watermelons. And we just did a lot of work, but they were very religious people. And that's where I learned the Lord's Prayer. And just, when my grandmother would be hanging clothes on the line, she would be telling us, why you always want to do right. And, the eyes of the Lord are always upon you. And so when I think about where I am today and how my spirituality plays such a significant role in the decisions that I make in business and in my daily life, it's not compartmentalized like most people. It is a part of who I am and what I do. And I like to consider that one of my best assets, is that my spiritual character, my light shines. And I think that that has to come from my grandparents.
That's essential, that moral compass. Without that, one can get lost in life very quickly. And you're a woman who's done so many things that also are stereotypically, especially for our generation, we're male dominated. I was curious. I knew that you earned a degree in civil engineering, a bachelor's degree. And I looked, and in 2018, only 15% of women are civil engineers or pursued degrees in civil engineering, I should say. So I would imagine back then it was even fewer. And I'm curious, as a woman, well, first of all, what drew you to that field to begin with? But then as a woman, what was your experience like?
Well, initially, I actually wanted to redesign the White House or the Six Flags amusement park.
Starting small.
So at that time, it wasn't like a challenge. It was more like, that doesn't seem like it's the best house in the world. And if it houses, our world leader, it should just look a little more fascinating, I always thought. And that was kind of the real thought behind that. And so I actually went to get a degree in architecture, but halfway through that, I figured that we were really good at making things look pretty, but we didn't have a clue as to how it stood up. And that's why I went back to get the degree in civil engineering. At that particular time, it was very male dominated. I didn't see it as much because I grew up with two brothers and two sisters, and we used to do a lot when we were on the fields in Alabama in terms of just, chasing a horse or trying to put a pig back into a pig pen. So we were very strong little children, and that led me to get into karate, taekwondo, bodybuilding. So everything that I was doing, track and field, pretty much was on the male kind of side. So when I was in school, it was more of the same, being in a classroom filled with guys, or, whether it was in a karate class or in the gym working out, I was always surrounded by guys. So I kind of knew the language, and I was always strong looking as a child. Field work, growing up on a farm, it requires a little bit of muscle. And so a lot of grit. And we developed a lot of that as children unknowingly. You just kind of do things. And when people expect you to do something, you don't think twice about it. You just do it. And so we were pretty strong. My parents didn't have a car. We lived on a street that was in the middle of a probably 15% incline. So we had to walk up and down the hill every day to get to the bus stop. And so just things like that were a part of that early muscle development that people have to go to the gym and get today. So I think when you're strong physically, you don't kind of look at yourself as the woman in the class or the female, quote unquote, the way that we perceive people. I think if you feel like you're strong physically, that you can handle things, you don't look at how male dominated something is or the sexism that may be related with it.
Got it. And so, as far as women being a minority in civil engineering and also in the Air Force, you would attribute it in part to their physical strength?
No, basically, because when we're kids, I think that people tend to make us think that things like math and science are difficult to do and that those aren't things that girls should do. That's just the way that you kind of grew up thinking that the boys are going to be good at math and the girls are going to be good at, home economics. And so and when I was in high school, or was it junior high school, we actually had to take home economics. And in that classroom, you looked around and there were no boys in that class. They were all in the drafting class. And so that probably just subliminal messages like that, I think, kind of put it in your head, but not where it's outward in speech. But yes, society and culture just kind of, at that particular time anyway, led you to believe that this is what you're supposed to do. And math and science weren't necessarily things that girls got into, or we weren't encouraged to do that.
That's very true. And I think that goes on somewhat even today, these subliminal messages. But you did get into it very much, and you were in the field for about 15 years. Were there any key accomplishments or challenges that you wanted to mention during that time briefly?
The main challenge for me, because I consider myself to be a very holistic, spiritual type of person, is that when I did work in offices, the 3 or 4 offices, I pretty much stayed with a couple of companies that I worked with. They were the top 5 civil engineering companies in the world, United States anyway, James Madison Cuts. So you got a lot of experience, a lot of good exposure there, but it was male dominated. Typically, wherever I worked, it was myself and the secretary were the only females in the building. So you were in an office for 8 hours a day. You're working on projects where it was primarily white men, and they would look at a beam, for instance, and say, well, this motherfucker is held up by this, whatever. I mean, so that's the type of language that you were exposed to. And I mean, it was just as common as saying that this beam holds this girder and it sits on this footer. And so all of those names were given names that men typically use when they just drank a 6-pack or something. And it's something you kind of got used to. You didn't feel as offended by it because it was just the way that they were. And of course, everything, happy hour, if they were going to go out after work, it was going to be to a bar to have some drinks and where everybody was falling over their feet and looking at women. And so those were obviously things that I didn't necessarily want to be involved with, but it was just the dynamic of the atmosphere.
Do you think that as a result of not being quote unquote one of the guys, did that ever play against you in an office sense?
Not really, because you had the other dynamic. The other dynamic is that just as much as I was a minority in terms of being a female, you also have to look at the fact that I was an African American. If you look at the statistics for African Americans in engineering, those numbers are probably about the same. So not only did you have this Black woman, you also had one that had a physical stature that was probably more physical than the white males that were in the office. So there was a curiosity about me more so than anything else. My father raised us to know math and science and English very well. And he said, if you can go in and it's always about what's between your ears. He always felt a need to just pour into us that you will always find yourself in places where there'll be racism, sexism. But at the end of the day, it's all about what's between your ears. And if you are able to communicate with people in an effective way, even if that effective way is telling them that I will sue you because of discrimination, just know that and know the rules of the game. And whatever decisions you make in terms of what you want to say, in terms of your speech or your actions towards other people, be prepared to deal with the consequences. Look at your worst case scenario and ask yourself, are you prepared to deal with the consequences if that situation gets to that point? And that's pretty much how I walked upon life. So there's a thin line between sincere humility and arrogance. And so the sincere humility is walking in the assurance and confidence that you're here on a journey. God is in control. God has your back, so to speak, when you're walking in a manner that is always to do good for others. And so that's always kind of how I carried myself. I've never been intimidated by my surroundings. I've never been egotistical. I always feel that every day is a day to learn something new, that you'll never know everything. You should try and be the best that you can be at whatever field that you're in and try and study yourself approved and just move through life and be as kind as possible. And so I was always the interesting person in the room, but I always exhibited kindness and humility. And I think that that has helped me. So I think where there could have been situations that were volatile in terms of sexism and racism, I just feel like even if that racist person or that sexist person was in the room, that I was treated differently by them because of the energy that I projected to them, if that makes any sense to you.
No, it does make sense. And that's a really fascinating perspective. And I think one that I just don't have because I am smaller and stereotypical female, at least physically. So talk to me a little bit about bodybuilding. I know that you entered competitions, and I was just wondering what drew you to that and how long you competed for. And then thirdly, I was curious, by nature, are you a competitive person?
I am definitely competitive by nature, but not necessarily, well, I guess, and for lack of a better term, I'm competitive with myself. I always believe at being better than I was yesterday, better than I was at the last competition, better than I was at the last lecture, the last interview, versus being better than the person that's doing a concurrent interview or the person that I'm competing at the last competition. Because you're never going, that's not what we were created for. You know, we have our path, and our path should be the best path that we can create. If that happens to be better than the other people that are on similar paths, that's great. But I think if we stay focused on ourselves and we always just reach to be better than we were, then that's going to be the ultimate. So in that sense, I'm very competitive in terms of just constantly setting a higher bar for myself.
And then in terms of, and I realize I loaded you with questions there all at once, but in terms of the competitions themselves, how long did you compete? I'm just curious what that world was like for you.
That was a crazy world. It's not a world that, and I find myself in a lot of, just like even in the business world, never went to business school. You find yourself in business. All of these things that I end up being in, they were not necessarily, I didn't go after them in that sense. I remember taking a karate class because I had joined a gym and they had a karate class, and the instructors were like top competitors in the local area. And they said that the stretching was really good to make your legs nice and toned. And so it was more about the physical aspects of what you could get out of it more so than the karate class itself. It was the regimen that they put in place that was turning out some really nice looking bodies. And so I joined the class, and someone kicked me in my chest like within the first couple of weeks. And it was a class that had, you know, predominantly, I think we had 2 women out of 22 students. And so the guys in the class suggested that I work out on the weights, because where the karate class was being taught was at a spa. And so they said, you should come down into the weight room with us because you need to get a little more strength to be able to handle the blows. And so I started working out in the gym with 5 or 6 guys in the karate class. And then once I started working out in the gym, they were like, oh, you have a natural build that would be great for bodybuilding. You should compete. And so after doing some weight training with them, you know, maybe 6 months later, I entered my first bodybuilding competition, which was a high level competition in DC, the DC Grand Prix. And I ended up getting in the top 3 for my weight class. I was always a big kind of girl, you know, whereas the heavyweight class may have been 125 pounds and above. I was like 150. So, you know, I just had solid weight, and I attribute that to the fact that I used to walk up this super hill every single day of my life to get to school. And so when you talk about building muscular density, that's one of the things that you have people focus on is hill work. Hill work is just like going in the gym and doing weights on your legs. And so that's how I got into it. And then it was dealing in a world where people were on steroids in order to get that look that they were looking for at that time in the national level. People were doing a lot of steroids, and I had just this natural density that people were striving to get legs my size by getting on steroids, and I had it naturally, and I just was able to develop it so easy when I started actually working out on weights. So that kind of thrust me into a world that I was not familiar with, nor did I look at it as, you know, an attractive world. But nevertheless, it was a competitive world for me because I had won second place at a major show. What does it take to get first place at the national level? So I continued to do that by mainly streamlining my diet, but not going on to the drugs. So I was probably one of the few natural competitors in the NPC that wasn't on steroids.
And then at age 29, which is typically, I don't want to say it's old because it's not by any stretch of the imagination, but for the armed forces, it's on the older side. You decided to join the Air Force, and that fascinated me. That was another pivot. What drew you to the Air Force?
The silliest thing in the world. After I had completed my engineering degree, I had actually purchased my home when I was 21. So I had my home, so I was a full-time single homeowner, full-time student, and I had a job working in engineering. And so, needless to say, my life was very compact. And then when I finally got the second degree in engineering, for the first time in I don't know how many years, I had a Saturday morning where I literally had nothing to do. And so I was lying across the bed. This girl jumps out of an aircraft and she looks at her watch and she's like, it's 0500. And she just kind of like spits out this litany of things that she's already completed. And she said that she was a part of the Air National Guard. I put my clothes on, jumped off the bed, and I drove out to Andrews Air Force Base and says, I want to be like that. And I actually wanted to fly planes. They told me I was too old. I think the cutoff age was 28 or 26. And they were like, but you have 2 degrees. We could use you in the civil engineering department. And I was so wet behind the ears. And I went over to the civil engineering section. And before I left the Air Force Base, 2 hours later, I had signed up to be a member of the DC Air National Guard. And they had me sign up as a civilian, but I was waiting on a commission. But in the meantime, they told me to come out one weekend out of the month, the assigned weekend, in civilian clothes, but I was actually a part of the unit. That went on for, I think, almost a year. I sat before 3 or 4 boards. At that time, they were downsizing in the active duty side of the Air Force. So the 3 people that beat me out each time were already officers. That's how it kind of got started. And then I was told that you can't be in the military for a year without going through the remedial process of coming through, or the entry process. And I either had to go to basic training and continue to wait for a commission, or I would lose my time served, blah, blah, blah. So I actually went to basic training. And that's probably the best example, Doria, of just kind of that physical stature that I talk about when I went to basic training. I think your first weekend, they make you run a mile as fast as you can, do as many push-ups as you can in a minute, and as many pull-ups. So I think I cranked out 75 push-ups in a minute and maybe like 25 pull-ups. And so that had all of the guys that were in charge kind of come to me, and they actually allowed me to come to the gym with them on the weekends. So I didn't have to experience that fear that kids go through in the military. And so situations like that are kind of what I'm speaking to when I say I didn't have some of the issues that probably our typical woman, quote unquote, would experience just because of the size that I had. They were looking at my arms saying, man, did you see the size of her arms? You know, biceps, or guns, they called them.
I was going to say 25, you said 25 pull-ups. Is that what you said? That's a lot.
It was. A lot of the guys were doing like 6 or 7, but for me, because I had done bodybuilding, I'd done karate, that was just a part of our training regimen almost.
Mm-hmm. And so from there, how long did you stay in the Air Force Guard?
I was in the Air Force Guard a total of 8 years, but 3 or 4 years of that, the last 2 were basically kind of a legal battle. The 2 prior to that, I transferred out of the Guard and went into the IG. It's similar to the reserve, but it's where you come in just 2 weeks out of the year. Because I got sick, when I was waiting on a commission, shortly after I came back from basic training, there was an instruction order to go to Korea. It was a 45-day assignment to repair the instrument landing system. That's the ILS system. The blinking lights that you see at the end of the runway had completely been demolished through the monsoon rains. And so they were looking for someone that had the specific experience to be able to come over and repair that, not having use of a 100-year flood zone, blah, blah, blah. So it kind of crossed over between having some architectural experience and some civil engineering experience. And they had sent the order up through the reserve component, and they were looking for an 04 and above. They couldn't find anyone. They sent it through the Guard, and they couldn't find anyone. And my commander at the time came to me and says, I did something without your permission. There was this order, blah, 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 and they couldn't find anyone. So I called headquarters and says, I've got this kid that's here. She's very mature. She's waiting on a commission, but she has all of the experience you need. Would you like to go to Korea for 45 days? And I thought it was exciting. So I said, yes. And I went. And while I was there, every base in the vicinity wanted to use me for 30 days. So I ended up being there a little less than a year. And on my return back, I was actually in my karate class. I got kicked and I thought I'd broken my finger. I went to the doctor, and long story short, ended up being diagnosed with tuberculosis. And then that just got really drawn out. And I think it was the medication itself that probably made the situation worse.
Just from my knowledge, tuberculosis, I know as a child, I got a test for it. Is that something that, if you could just educate me on this part of it, is it something that you can pick up even if you're tested for it? I assume so.
I don't know if you can pick it up if you're just tested for it. I think it was the exposure to the environmental conditions in Korea. I'm not really sure. I've even done subsequent research on that. And a lot of it's a little sketchy as to whether you can actually do a preventive measure for that prior to leaving the country. My doctor, when I was in the doctor's office, actually asked me if I had gone through any testing prior to leaving the country, because when I told him that my finger wasn't broken, could you take a look at my chest? Because I've been having some palpitations, some just discomfort at night. And he said that he didn't see anything. And I says, well, I could just be excited from having returned back to the country. And he asked me where I'd been. I said, I'd been to Korea for 6, 7 months. And then that's when he asked me what type of testing had been done prior to leaving. And I says, I didn't actually do any testing because there wasn't a real protocol in place, I think, for the guard. Today, everybody goes overseas. At that particular time, the guard pretty much just supported the state. And the amount of times that a guard member would go overseas was highly infrequent. I think the out processing thing was a little different. And furthermore, when I was scheduled to go, I couldn't go at that particular time. So I had a meeting that I needed to do with my job. And I told them that I could be reimbursed. I was going to take a later flight out. And that may have played a role in it as well, as in terms of just the out process itself. But nevertheless, it just kind of was not a great experience.
Oh, I can't imagine. Tuberculosis is a very serious illness. And so you say that that is what drew you to pivot to the more naturopathic route, if
Yes.
I'm understanding you right?
That was
Okay.
the impetus, just because as I was getting decreasingly worse, my dad, many years ago, had tuberculosis. And at that particular time, when you had tuberculosis, they actually removed you from your family for 6 months. And so I think that more so than anything else caused the anxiety and the impatience with the medicine, because my parents were really hopping on me that you need to stop going. I was going out to Malcolm Grove, the hospital at Andrews Air Force Base. You need to just go see your own private physicians. The military takes care of a lot of things, I think, in a lot of cases because people can't otherwise afford to. But I had my own private doctors and medical insurance. So I started going over to Georgetown. And that's where a physician's assistant said to me, whenever I would take my clothes off to be tested, people would always be like, wow, you have no fat on you. Look at your muscles, things like that. And she immediately said, you probably aren't acclimated to taking pharmaceutical therapy, are you? And I told her, no, I never take aspirin. If anything, I'll just, take some apple cider vinegar, blah, blah, blah. And she says, you might want to go online and look into a raw diet. It's been my understanding that that can actually reverse illness and disease. And at that time, what it takes 2 seconds to do today on google.com may have taken 2 to 3 weeks, a lot of different readings. And after doing that, the common conclusion, the commonality between different spheres was that a diet that is primarily raw fruits and vegetables, lots of raw juices, can reverse illness and disease. And today we look at it as somewhat of a plant-based diet or the live diet. At that time, I was doing 6 pieces of chicken breast a day, 2 boxes of spinach, 2 gallons of water, 24 egg whites, preparing for a bodybuilding show. So I went cold turkey and just cut out everything except lots of fruits and salads. And I would venture to say in 2 weeks, I felt better than I did the entire 6 months that I was sick.
That's incredible. And so obviously that worked for you. And I would think made you a firm believer in the power of what you're doing. I also wondered, is there a lesson that you learned in the Air Force that helped you in your business career when you started your company?
Absolutely. I loved the Air Force just because of how regimented it is. I am a stickler for discipline. And in the military, I used to, the joke with me was like, you can't go to the bathroom without, a protocol in the military. I mean, there has to be a rule and a regulation and a procedure, a method in doing things. And when I went to basic training, I must say, I used to sit in the bunk and people would come over. I felt like Mother Teresa when I was in basic training because people were like, oh, you have these degrees. And, so this wasn't officer training school. This was actual basic training school. So these were kids that were just coming in. And so I already had a career and they just felt like I was just so far ahead of that I want to be like Dallas kind of campaign going on in the bunker lab. And so, but what I saw was what they couldn't see. And that was the advantage of joining an organization like the military. So when I came in and you saw these kids, they were kids. Some of them were from the middle of Omaha, Nebraska. Some were from Brooklyn, New York. Some of them had super smart street sense. Others were people that had been cocooned somewhere, literally. And then we all came together. Some of them had a little rhythm. Some of them had no rhythm. But at the end of 6 weeks, when you took this rainbow spectrum of people, cultures and disciplines, and we're all marching to the same beat. We're all thinking alike. That's what basic training is about. I tell people all the time in biblical studies that we are supposed to have this transformation of the mind. And that's what the military does. The military gets you to transform your thinking to what they need you to think and believe.
Right. And so how would you say that that helped you in business?
For me in business, you've got to have a plan. You've got to be able to see that there's an enemy. The enemy is not necessarily your competition, but sometimes you could be your own enemy. And so you have to have a plan. You have to look at things and say, what's the overall goal here? You always have the mission statement, but then you have those daily tasks that need to be done that go towards that, the bigger picture. And a lot of times when I look at young businesses today, they see, Shark Tank, they see the end of the game, but you have to realize what gets a person on Shark Tank interested in the person that comes onto the show. It's that trench work. It's what we have to do when we're sitting in the military and we go out for combat training. You've got to lay in the trenches and just stay there and see what those conditions are. You've got to get cold. You've got to get wet. You've got to get bored. You've got to do all of these little things before you can actually see the victory line. And so, if nothing else, just proper planning and the right use of the different types of talents and experiences that you have around you.
That is a very apt description of entrepreneurship, very much in the trenches and having to wear multiple hats before you become a brand that people recognize. And so today you have a business, True Pop. Using your terminology, what is your mission statement and what gap in the market are you trying to fill?
Well, the business itself is Life by Dallas. True Pop is one of many things that we offer in terms of products and services to ultimately educate and equip and empower individuals to utilize nutrition for life-changing and life-saving practices. And not just to do it for a particular illness at the time, but as a way of life. And I am just adamant about, when I talk to people, I don't want them to talk to me about the popcorn without talking to me about lifestyle practices. I don't want them to talk to me about lifestyle practices without talking about a healthy snack that would be incorporated into those lifestyle practices and the physical activity that goes along with that. And so today I see things that, I'm just, I get discouraged. I don't know that in my lifetime, I will see the change that needs to occur in order to do things differently. In business, you will never, ever be successful if you continue to do the same thing that's not working. You've got to do something different. And this track in America that we're on with health, only in America, we joke about it and say, in America, you let somebody take a body part and all the money out of your pocket and you still die. And we still continue to do that. When we look at the gap I was reading an article this past weekend in fortune.com about Alzheimer's and, the fact that we have not made any progress in 20 years. But yet you have this guy that's living out in the rainforest and he's saying, hey, this is the road that we need to be taking to address this. And because there's no profit, there's no gain there, and we continue. So individually, and so if I don't make a difference at a larger platform, my goal is that the individuals that I come into contact with will get it. They'll get it to a point where it makes such a significant difference and impact in their lives that they will spread it to their family lives, and those families will branch out to their communities, and then we get it from the back end. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do. Do you also then offer coaching one-on-one or in groups as well to bring that mission statement to many people?
I do. And it's the reason that True Pop Popcorn is not making the millions that it should be making. I say that I'm a healer, and I tell you, it is the most difficult between trying to get people as an ordained minister to try and have people act as converted and convicted Christians versus cultural Christians to try and get people to do the health thing is the same thing. It's just a very difficult task because it requires a mindset change. And so when I'm talking to individuals, I try to pull them in so they can pull their family members in. I do a lot of work with churches. I've worked with the United States Department of Agriculture. They literally built a countertop in their main headquarters in downtown DC, a countertop in the middle of the cafeteria, and invited me to come down weekly and just do what I do. And so I'm teaching people, if I show you how to put together a salad, I'm showing you how to put together a salad that uses the ingredients that I have just spoken about in order to get the different parts of your body, your organs and your glands working the way that they should. So everything is, it's never about a cooking session. It's about a teaching session on how the human body works, the different things that go together to make your body function the way that it should properly. And this is what you do with it. I think we have enough information in America. I mean, the internet and technology is amazing what you can teach yourselves, but I think the practical side is not there. Everybody, all of my clients have chia seeds in their pantries. They have goju berries, but they don't know what to do with these things. They don't know that unless you grind down a flax seed, that you really are not going to get the nutritional value for it. So what does that look like when you actually implement the flax seeds into your diet? And so just teaching on that level, churches, I'm always teaching at someone's education congress or a Bible institute. So we're doing it at large levels, but I haven't figured out how to actually get people to a point where it just, we've done it individually. I have to take that back because we've made a significant difference in a lot of people's lives, but it's like anything else. It's the environment until you change the dynamic of the environment. So you give people good news and, they begin to incorporate it into their diet, and then they come to church and they're stuck there for 7 hours because of all of the events that are going on that day, and there's nothing to eat there unless it's something floating in grease. Then what? So it's trying to just get everyone to change on a larger level, and that's been the challenge.
And I think something that you mentioned, which really resonates with me, is that in America, there is not as much emphasis as I think any of us would like on preventative practices, whether it's nutrition, exercise, various things. And you alluded to this a little bit. There's a lot more money in the curing of disease through pharmaceuticals and the like. With that landscape, and it is a hard landscape to go up against, why do you believe that you are the person who is going to be able to impact this issue?
I don't know that I will be the person that will impact it or even can. I do believe that there is a calling on my life to do that. That is something that when I look back at my entire life and all of the different elements to this puzzle, I keep coming back to the fact that I want it to be commissioned, but had I gotten a commission, I believe I'd be a general or on my way to being a general. And I believe that would have taken every ounce of my time. There would have been no True Pop Popcorn. There would have been no Dr. Dallas. And but had I not experienced what I experienced, there also wouldn't be a True Pop or a Dr. Dallas. And so when you look back at a time that obviously it had nothing to do with me, it wasn't a part of my plan, but all of these little elements that have been instrumental in Life by Dallas becoming what it is, the experiences that I've had. I did work in South Africa for 5 years. Every 8, 10 weeks, I was going back and forth. And these people were bringing me over, and how I met them and how all of these different things came to be, how I ended up writing my first book because my secretary quit on me and people were calling because I was doing radio at that time and asking me a million questions that were very repetitive. I was like, you know what? I just need to do a booklet and put this together. So all of these things that just keep bringing me back to this place of I can't move forward with the popcorn because someone's dying of cancer and they want me to come over and help or whatever. I just feel like that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
And I just wanted to move back to that, what you mentioned about your work in South Africa. Can you tell listeners what was the catalyst of that and how is that manifesting?
Well, it's not manifesting the way that I exactly want or need it to right now, but originally I was actually in a church giving a lecture at the beginning of a year, and I was talking about an herbal tincture that I own. It's called God's Promise. It's 7 very nice virtual herbs on a glycerin base. And if you take 2 tablespoons a day, I mean, that's where my clients that are really, really third, fourth stage cancer or dealing with some other chronic diseases. And that's usually, I typically won't let people buy that or sell it to them until they've gone through one of our remedial detox programs so that it can take on, the body can take it on as best as possible. And so I was talking about how I was using that with a lot of people in the DC area that had HIV. And though they were doing the pharmaceutical therapy, a lot of them expressed the discomfort that they had with sleep and how tired they would be, doing a regular work day if they were still working. And I started giving them that particular tincture, and they were having some good activity against the HIV, I should say. And the gentleman that was in the audience was from South Africa. And he comes up to me afterwards and he was like, what do I have to do to get you to come to my country? And I was like, oh, I've never been to South Africa. Just give me a plane ticket. I'd be happy to come over and do some things. And I don't think it was 2 months later that he had me a plane ticket. And he arranged for me to be there for 2.5 weeks. And I don't think I spoke less than 2 times a day, every single day, to audiences of 500 to 1,000 people. It was amazing. It was just an amazing experience. The minimal information that I had was just received so well, and they were like sponges and they absorbed everything. And a few people at a couple of the places that I went to had said that, could they sponsor me to come back in a few weeks? And at first it was exciting. So I was going back pretty often, very quickly. And then they got me in front of the parliament there. And we had discussed doing a clinic, a holistic clinic there, where we could implement a 6-week protocol to be able to put people on the detox programs that I use, where we're doing a series of green enemas and putting people on a raw diet and the herbal teas to start out with. But dealing with South Africa is like dealing with molasses. I mean, everything is a very slow process. And then it just really slowed down, and a lot of them ran out of money. So I was sponsoring myself, going back and forth every 2 months or so for about 2 years. We had gotten very close. We put together a small little building where we were going to just educate people on, growing their own herbs and things like that. And then Mandela died when we were about to make a significant stride. I had actually set aside 3 weeks to be there. And during that period, you couldn't do anything but mourn Mandela. Everything that was planned for that time period that I was there had come to a halt. I could do nothing. So I think I did about 80 videos during that period because I had nothing else to do. And I told them that I wouldn't come back until I had gotten the popcorn to a place where it was stable enough to be able to finance putting a clinic there myself and do some other things. So I'm in good contact with them, and we hope to pursue that. Yes.
Yes. And so, I mean, you're obviously doing multiple things. What I'm wondering is a few things. First, do any mentors come to mind for you?
Not really, unfortunately. And I know that there should be. And that's probably why when you talk to me, I mean, and we can be honest. I mean, if I'm in an event, I always get a lot of traction just because of, I think, the energy that comes off. But if you look at, for instance, I'm having some people now redo our whole social media platform, the website and everything. My website's crashed last Easter morning. Someone was trying to get one of my books and they kept calling me. And I'm like, is she stupid or what? All she has to do is go. And I go on and I figured out I'm stupid because my stuff is totally down. And I couldn't get in touch with my web developer. So I redid my 2 sites just to get the online stores back up and working immediately. But I wasn't looking for the appearance or the continuity or anything, just trying to get the e-store working because most people find themselves at our site because of all of the lectures I'm doing and things like that. So they aren't driven there through search engine optimization. So things like that. So having a mentor would be like, you really need to clean up your act here and have a consistent theme. When people come to your site, you can't get around.
Understood. So it's a very grassroots effort and it's driven primarily by you. Can you tell me, there are a lot of popcorn brands in the market. Skinny Pop is one that comes to mind. How has True Pop grown, or how are you hoping it will grow in 2019?
In 2019, we're strategically trying to get to a point where we're going to get the product to a point. What I have done is in the last 2 years, I've just begun to pitch the product. I was looking for a couple of investors. For many years, the product was just a better for you snack to help people in the community that were looking to continue snacking, but to be able to do it in a better way. It was just a tool to be able to help individuals. It was never there for profit per se. I always looked upon it as a gift that God has given me to allow me to have the flexibility to be able to do consultants and to go to churches a lot of times and do it on a charitable effort. It's allowed me to do 144 funerals in the last 14 years that you obviously are not going to get anything else done when you're doing funerals. So I did Costco. I had an opportunity to go into Costco and do road shows where you come in and you sample your product for a 4-day period over a 6-period month about 4 years ago. And then that's when I realized that we're not just a better for you healthy snack product. We are a really good tasting popcorn company that people were very excited about. We were selling volumes of product during those 4-day periods that far exceeded the expectations of any of the Costco managers. And I don't know if you know, but at Costco, they never sell more than 2 or 3 items in any category to keep you from having to think about it. They feel like if you have to think about, which one do I want to get, you'll walk around the store and then you eventually won't get either of them. So they minimize your selection so that you can purchase more. And so at that particular time, Skinny Pop, as well as Pirate's Booty, were in Costco when we were there. And we were selling more popcorn hands down. Now, you just asked about Skinny Pop. Skinny Pop was just acquired, I think, for $32 billion by Hershey Chocolate Candy Company. Skinny Pop does $544 million worth of sales in a 12-month period off of one of their 6 flavors. Now, anytime you go into Wegmans or Whole Foods and we're doing demos, when people taste our product, they'll buy it. So we're highly competitive with Skinny Pop when it comes to the product itself. We obviously don't have the distribution network that Skinny Pop has. So what we need to do is get the distribution network in place, get the capacity that Skinny Pop has in terms of sales executives and brand ambassadors, et cetera, and then put ourselves out there so that we too can get an acquisition that comes close to that. Subsequently, the same chocolate candy, Hershey's Chocolate Candy, acquired the other popcorn company, Pirate's Booty, for $328 million, about 6 months after they acquired Skinny Pop. So there is a trend. We would like to go to Mars Chocolate Candy and say, hey, do you know what your competition is doing? We have a product that research and development's always been done. Now, when I started looking for investors and I began to do some pitch competitions, I got just super raves back from the people that were in the audience. And of course, everyone loves the popcorn. We would always give out snack bags whenever I present to anyone. And so we can put our popcorn in a bowl and put Skinny Pop in a bowl and say, here, make up your mind. Would you like to come and invest in us? The problem is because my sales aren't where they probably should be, then an investor that I'm looking to get $1 million or $2 million from technically could take 60-70% of my company, in which I've not paid myself a salary and the sweat equity and actually did the manufacturing for the first 10 years. So that kind of made me take my foot off of the acceleration And then I've just figured out how to do it differently, where I can look for funding for $1 million, $2 million just to fill the talent gap and not deal with an evaluation until after the first year of cells, and just look at what we've already done, though we've done cells, as a pre-development stage.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs do that. They take $1 or $2 million and they don't give away their entire company, which they've, as you said, put in a ton of sweat equity and bootstrapped, and take that $1 or $2 million. They then are able to grow themselves to a certain scale. Then they are either able to continue to grow or become acquired, as you alluded to.
Right. I mean, the cells for popcorn, I mean, to be making 20, 30 million a year in cells, it's rather easy. I mean, it's like disposable tampons. It's something that you need. It's something that you have to buy some more of. It's not like a ketchup or something that you might be getting once every 6 months. So the food space in and of itself is a very difficult and highly, it's not as much competitive as it's just difficult because there's so much money that has to be put out. Manufacturing costs, raw material costs. People don't look at that. They just look at, oh, you're in all these stores, but they're clueless about what it takes to actually make it in the food space.
What stores are you in?
We are in some of the Whole Food stores, the Wegman stores in their Nature's Market section, My Organic Market. Most of the premier stores traditionally have carried our product since I created it in 1999. We are on Amazon, we are online, and wherever I go to talk about health and wellness, we always take the product. So we're continuously building. We have a very strong, like a basic core of folks that have been purchasing the product since its inception, just because it is their snack product. What I plan to do to grow the company is just, I think it's a pretty solid plan over the next 24 months. And it's going to start with social media really helping us out.
That's very exciting. And I can't wait to see what you do next. And we will certainly be looking for you on social. Where can our listeners learn more about you and about True Pop?
Well, because we were Dallas Popcorn for so many years, and when I decided that we'd go right after Skinny Pop by changing the name to True Pop to insinuate that other stuff really isn't true, I hadn't realized that True Pop is actually an international music company that has the truepop.com. So you'll still have to go, and they're not trying to sell us the rights. So you'll have to go to dallaspopcorn.com, and that will also link you to lifebydallas.com. And our YouTube channel, Ask Dr. Dallas, has a lot of free information for individuals to learn a lot about the power of natural foods for healing.
Wonderful. And your YouTube channel is where you also show people how to create food that is very healthy for them to consume and how to do it.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you for walking me through what is an exceptional life, and I'm sure will continue to go places. I can't wait to see where you are even a year from now.
Well, thank you for having me, sir. Some very kind words that you've just put out there, and I appreciate that.
You've been listening to SheVentures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.